Hello, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the Falling Walls Breakthrough Conversations. This is our last day of the Falling Walls Summit, and today we bring this format to you in partnership with the Federal Ministry of Education and Research and Springer and Nature. So we're giving the opportunity for the audience online to interact with us and the speaker today. And so for those who want to pose any question, please raise your hand on the Zoom call. We have a technical team ready to answer any technical questions or concerns that you might have. So feel free to use the chat to raise these questions. So today we have Professor Edward Chang. Edward is Joan and Sanford Weill Chair of Neurological Surgery at University of California, San Francisco. Edward is a speaker at the Falling Walls Breakthrough Day, which is happening today. So welcome, Edward. It's nice to have you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So before we get into your research and professional background, could you tell us a little bit more about your personal interest in the topic of neurological surgery? Namely, which point in life did you discover or recognize that you wanted to follow this path? Is there any particular inspiration that you can share with us?
Yeah, actually, as a medical student in San Francisco, I was really fortunate to have a teacher who, while we were learning neuroanatomy, the different parts of the human brain, actually brought me down to see a brain surgery. And I figured out at that instant, that's what I want to do. And the rest is history. I love the field. You get to use your hands in a very direct way, take care of patients when they really need you, and there's so much to learn about how the human brain works.
It's a fascinating organ, super complex, and we still have a lot to learn about it, right?
We do, yeah.
And so, tell us a little bit more about your breakthrough. What is all about?
Our breakthrough is about the breakthrough of restoring communication for people who have lost that because of paralysis. A lot of our research over the last decade is focused on how the human brain processes the words that I'm speaking right now. Speaking is very unique in defining human behavior, and our work has focused on understanding how consonants and vowels, the different parts of speech, are created by the control of the vocal tract, the lips, the jaw, the tongue, the larynx, when we speak, like we are right now. There's a very detailed map of all of the different parts of the vocal tract that work together to give rise to words.
And so you work more on the basic side to try to understand how we speak and interact with each other. And so your breakthrough, does it involve neurostimulation as far as I'm aware?
Not so much neurostimulation, but recordings, neurophysiological recordings, where electrodes are placed on the brain surface. Usually several hundred electrodes that are placed on the brain surface that allows us to understand the brain activity that's happening at millimeter and millisecond resolution from the outer part of the brain called the cortex.
And this is applied to patients.
Yeah. So this is So a lot of our work was developed in the process of what we call brain mapping. Brain mapping is a technique that I specialize in to take care of patients that have tumors or epilepsy from part of the brain, and we developed the technique of brain mapping through the electrodes and the analysis of the signals in the electrodes to help us understand how language works in the human brain. We used a lot of this knowledge that we had about consonants and vowels, the control of the vocal tract. Once we knew that we had this very complete description of how this area works in terms of how it controls the lips, jaw, and tongue when we speak, we thought about a project to try to restore communication for people who are paralyzed by recording from those areas that are still intact. Let's say someone who's got a spinal cord or spinal cord injury or brainstem stroke, to try to bypass those injuries, have those signals read out directly to a computer, and then translated into words.
That's so interesting and fascinating. And so, tell us about what's going to happen in your presentation or the talk here. As far as I'm aware, you're going to show how a man with severe paralysis has been enabled to communicate in sentences, right? And I think that's what you're talking about, right? So, do you think that breaking the wall of speech loss will pave the way for many more similar surgical procedures to come?
Yeah, that's right. So what I am going to talk about is the journey and the process and some of the milestones in this journey to restore speech to people who have lost it due to paralysis. And primarily what we've done is just a proof of principle that this is in fact possible with what we call a neuroprosthetic device. There's a lot of progress to be made in the coming months and years. But I think that now that it's been shown that it can be done, I think things are going to happen much, much quicker. And I do think that this will be a therapy that will be available for patients in the coming years.
Fascinating. So moving away a little bit from your speciality, so in terms of more the broader context of science, what do you think are the main ingredients to produce good science?
There are many really important critical ingredients, I think, for good science, but the first and foremost is curiosity. You know, for me, that's what's really driven a lot of our work from day one, which is just a basic curiosity about what makes us human, what endows us with these behaviors like speech and language that are so unique. When I'm in the operating room, I look down at the brain surface and I see it there where we do a lot of our work, very delicately removing a part of the brain that is causing seizures or a brain tumor. And it's hard not to be curious about how the human brain as an organ seems so inert. It's almost incomprehensible how it's processing so much information in that as an organ. And so I think it really starts with curiosity, but that's not enough. It's also hard work, a lot of training, especially in statistics. A lot of other things are required as well.
And you started by recognizing the power of mentorship, right?
Yeah.
How it may lead and inspire someone's career.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find that very fascinating. So I think we have a question from the audience.
Okay.
So maybe before I continue with my own questions.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I have a question about some book recommendations, maybe pop science book that ordinary people can read so they understand more things about the brain. For example, I read a book which was called Where Our Brains from the Womb to Alzheimer, and I think I found this book quite fascinating. But yeah, maybe you have any other recommendations for me and for our guest as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. In terms of books, it's an interesting question. It's about speech and language. Right now, I would say one of my favorites was Steven Pinker's book on speech and language, and both as a survey of linguistics, but also the state of the art in terms of the neurobiology. Things have advanced a lot since then. where I think a lot of us now are listening to podcasts and things like that to get more recent knowledge about the biology of the brain. Unfortunately, the time it takes to write a book these days, things become obsolete almost by the time it gets published. So things are happening very fast. Podcasts for me are a great way to stay in tune.
There you have the recommendation. So I now moving a little bit from the neurosciences or neurosurgery realm. So I'm curious about your opinion of the impact of COVID-19, the pandemic, in terms of what was the impact in science, but not only in science, also in society, apart from the devastating deaths and the suffering. Is there a positive side to the pandemic in your opinion?
Well, the pandemic was clearly devastating, and I think both as a scientist and as a clinician, I think it's been a huge obstacle and struggle for us all together. I do have to say, though, that one of the inadvertent consequences of the pandemic, however, is that it's brought us, at least many of the people in my own group in my hospital, much closer. I think we have begun to very much value one another in ways that we perhaps did not before. Many of us could not basically, or did not have the privilege or opportunity to stop working. Those of us who were in the hospital continue to see our patients, continue to take care of them. And I think that in many ways it's a testament to the community and human spirit of a lot of the professionals at the front lines of healthcare.
What would you like to see more in the world?
I'd like to see a lot less, I guess, division, especially in the United States. I'd love to see that we start working constructively. There are huge problems ahead. I think there's great opportunities both in science and beyond. We have extraordinary challenges, but extraordinary opportunities as well. And I'd love for us to just be able to move forward quickly and decisively on major goals for society and our scientific agendas.
Do you think a more sustainable future should be part of this equation, or what you're saying? Do you think, in terms of sustainability, we have a long way to go in everything that we do, right? In the hospital and healthcare practice, or even everywhere, sustainability. And so what's your take on that?
I think we've got a long ways to go. I mean, we've obviously made a lot of progress, but in terms of sustainability, I don't think there's any question that that's a huge priority. In the United States, I've learned that one of the biggest generators of waste is the hospital, in terms of materials, things that go to landfill, in terms of plastics, in terms of chemicals that are even released into the air from our anesthesia machines. There are just so many opportunities in every sector, but certainly healthcare, I think, is an important area to think about. How do we improve and make sure things are sustainable for the future?
And in the lab too, right? When I was a researcher in the lab, I remember looking at the waste bin, and there was so much plastic that we used, pipette tips, and so much. And I think, I agree, there's a lot of opportunities there. So what about the Falling Wall Summit? What has been your experience? And today's the last day. Do you have any expectations? What's your take on this summit?
Well, the Falling Wall Summit, I think, is just an extraordinary collection of very creative, groundbreaking individuals and teams and groups that it's so exciting to see everyone here under one roof. The program has great momentum. I think the planners have done an excellent job putting together an exciting program, and it seems to just keep building and building, getting better and better.
Thanks for that feedback. It's nice to hear. And so, if you weren't a neurosurgeon, what else do you imagine yourself being?
Maybe a film director. I love movies, and um, I love drama. I love science fiction. Some days it feels even like the work that we're doing is science fiction. But I love the creative aspect. I love, being able to work with people. These are all things that are great things that I enjoy.
So, do you want to elaborate on that? That you feel sometimes you're doing a little bit of science fiction. Do you actually look at what you're doing, such as like creating these arrays of to read the neurological signals? Do you see this being applicable and applied to widely, even outside an hospital settings?
Yeah, good question. It really does feel like science fiction sometimes. The things that we're working on now were things that didn't exist, for example, when I was training. Not because necessarily the electrodes or the hardware, but the computers, the algorithms, the machine learning didn't exist even 5 years ago that we're now using every day. And it seems that there's no turning back. It's moving very, very quickly. It's a huge privilege to be able to work with patients, and I'm very much inspired by their needs, their unmet needs. It's hard to imagine that in 2022 that there's so many people still suffering so much when technology can be used in really thoughtful and creative ways to help. And that is not only what inspires a lot of what we do, but also is an important source of creativity for how we think about how we can solve some of these unmet needs. So I do think that as time goes on, there is potential for some of this technology to be applied even outside of the setting of people who have medical conditions, i.e. those who are paralyzed. People have talked about applications of neurotechnologies that go beyond medical ones into perhaps consumer in the future. And I think that that's something that we should really address as society, really try to understand what are the ethics of this, what are the limits that we should really think about in these new technologies.
I totally agree. I forgot to say in the beginning, but I'm an associate editor at Nature Biomedical Engineering, and we publish a lot of content in wearable devices and also neuro implants for stimulation, but also for measuring signals in a lot of different contexts, including disease, but not exclusively. And indeed, there's a huge room for development. And so I was just wondering if you could share with us a recent study that you were, okay, this is really something incredible, a study in your area that is not coming from your lab, but is something that you found original and innovative, as you were saying, that there's a lot of good research out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of work going on out there. Some of my colleagues down at Stanford have done an incredible, I think, breakthrough in decoding, for example, handwriting when a paralyzed person can't move their arm, but has decoded last year, decoded the ability to translate the intention to handwrite letters into text on a screen. I thought that was a very cool, big breakthrough for the field. And a lot of our work in speech is just very complementary to that. I think as this time goes on, the proof of principle is there that communication will happen through implantable neurotechnologies that can read out brain activity at high bandwidth. Now it's about how quickly, how big of a vocabulary, how accurately can this be done? These are all questions about optimization, and believe me, there's a lot of room for improvement. I think we've just shown the beginning of what's possible. The second thing is really thinking about how do we expand beyond communication? What other functions can we restore to people who are paralyzed beyond translating words, beyond moving a cursor on a screen? What other functions can be restored? And that'll be very exciting to see in the coming months.
Yeah, I agree. And what about our social behavior? How do you ever wonder that, because when you're studying the brain, there's a lot of there's a huge focus in disease, there's in how people articulate speech, as you were saying. But I wonder, what about the brain and the physiology of the brain that touches, our society dimension, because there's so much to society, right? And we are all so dependent on others, just to feel happy or even further. Does your curiosity ever goes to the social science aspect of things?
Yeah, you're right. One of the main reasons we communicate through language is because we're social creatures. That's the whole point of it, and it's to really just convey information from one person's mind to the other. But you're right, there's so many other cues and ways of communicating with others that go beyond what we say or what we hear. We're not studying a lot of that directly, but we are getting into areas that are related. The electrodes that record from the part of the brain responsible for language can also be used in a different part of the brain to record and analyze the brain signals and structures related to how we feel. So in a different set of projects that we've done, primarily to help treat depression, we've used similar kinds of intracranial electrodes and the signals from those recordings to decode basically what someone's mood is like, and use those signals to actually use very, very small focal stimulation to brain circuits that are involved with depression to help try to relieve those symptoms. Now, this is not really about changing someone's sociability. Maybe indirectly, when people's depression and mood is better, they feel more interactive and more social. But these other aspects of the human mind, other aspects of what makes us human, I think will be areas that can be studied directly like this, and that there is a lot of opportunity there to help some of the unmet needs for neurological conditions as well.
Hopefully. So we have 1 minute left. So what would you say to young scientists? Do you have any piece of advice?
I would say that this is an extremely exciting time for neuroscience, biology. The future, I think, of technology is going to be in biology and neuroscience. It's an extraordinary area because it mixes so much between different fields of the life sciences, but also the quantitative sciences like engineering and physics and math. All of those things are important and critical, but also the humanities. Within neuroscience, these questions get into who we are, what makes us special, how we think, the decisions we make. So in many ways, there's room for everyone's different interests and skills in this area.
Thank you for that, for fascinating conversation, and thank you for the audience. Thank you for the questions, and I hope you have a rest of a great Falling Walls Summit. Wish you all the best, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thanks.